Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the psychological model of addiction. So there is a medical model, which is very important to understand, and it's true, and there are things in your brain which are different, and there's some genetic issues, and there's that whole dopamine circuitry, and all of that is true and important. But there's also a psychological understanding of addiction, and they kind of go hand in hand, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. The psychological one is much more kind of personal. It's subjective, but it's about your experience in the world. And because it's supposed to be ideally something you connect to, so please get involved, particularly if you don't connect to something. This is not like some type of dogma that I'm telling you and you have to believe it, like, okay, that's really interesting, thank you. This is supposed to be like sort of describing your guys' experience of yourselves and other people in the world. And so particularly if you don't connect with something, just say so, put up your hand, ask a question. It tends to work a lot better as well if you ask questions. There's a lot to talk about. It usually goes for a bit over an hour, and there's a lot to talk about. So if there's something that comes up that you're not connecting with or you don't understand or you want explained more, please put up your hand and be interactive. It just tends to work better if it's interactive. Otherwise, I'm just talking for an hour, which gets very boring for you and for me.
So for us.
That's right.
Yeah, for us.
Okay, so psychologically or experientially, addiction has a lot to do with emotions. Emotions are something that we as a society aren't particularly great at, I think, dealing with or talking about. But my experience is that emotions are central to addictions. So if you take a room full of people with addictions, like you guys, and I ask you how you experience your emotions in your life in the world, the answers will tend to be on the extremes of a spectrum of emotional experience. So some of you, I would ask how you experience your emotions, and some of you will feel your emotions, but when you feel them, they are quite overwhelming. Like they're very intense. It's like they're too much, they're too overwhelming, too much, too scary, it's just too much to deal with. So you feel emotions, but when you feel them, they tend to be extreme and overwhelming. On the other side of the spectrum, and some of you will be here, is that I walk through life and I don't really feel my emotions at all. In fact, I'm actually quite numb for my emotions, like I just don't feel them. That can be a little bit tricky to identify sometimes in yourself, because when you've been numb from emotions for so long, you don't even realise you're numb because you're just disconnected. And when you're numb for something for a long time, you don't realise that you're numb from it, if that makes sense. It's like you're wearing your watch. You don't realise that you're wearing your watch after a while because it's like you're just numb and then you don't know it's... Anyway, I think you get what I'm saying. Or you can fluctuate. Some people switch between both. So at times I feel stuff, I'm like triggered in the world and the emotion is overwhelming for me and it's too much, or otherwise I'm numb. And so some people flip as well. What someone with an addiction doesn't tend to be able to do is kind of just like walk through the world, something triggers me, it hurts, I'll cry, I'll get angry, I'll get anxious, I'll feel it, and I'll just, I'll feel the loneliness or whatever it is, and I'll feel it, and it sucks, and it hurts, and I'll feel it, and then it goes, and then I get on with my life. That does not tend to happen. What tends to happen is something will trigger me, and it will drive me crazy because it's overwhelming, or I'll get triggered and actually I feel nothing because my mind has numbed my emotions for me. And one important thing to think about with that idea is that wherever you are on that spectrum, or if you bounce between the two, it's important to realise that the issue is the same. They literally feel like opposites, but they're actually the same issue, because if I'm on the numb side, all that means is that I have overwhelming emotions, but my mind has numbed my emotions for me. So if I'm numb, I still have overwhelming emotions, it's just that my mind has cut them off for me, because as humans, we're amazing at cutting off painful emotions. We're very, very good at it. It happens unconsciously, without us actually planning to do it. We just do it. And so wherever I am on that spectrum, the core issue is the same, that I have emotions that are overwhelming and I can't sit with them. I can't feel them. I can't just kind of sit and feel with them and then get on with my life. And so, just a little metaphor for that is like a metaphor of a container. So, in other words, my mind and my body as a human, part of the job of my mind and my body is to hold my emotions. In other words, the emotions come in, I feel them, and I can contain them. In other words, I can just kind of sit with them and feel them and hold them. And that's like a container. So it's like my mind and my body is a container for emotions. But in addiction, what happens is the container is not working properly. So I can't contain my emotions, I can't hold them. And so either they're overwhelming or my mind cuts them off from me because I can't sit with them. So my container's not working. And there's only really two ways that starts for us humans. So the first way, and this will be true for many people in the room, the first way is that I never had a fully functioning container to begin with. Because actually a lot has to go right in a childhood. It's kind of like the stars have to align for a kid to get out of childhood and adolescence with a container that's functioning. A lot of things in childhood will cause that person to not be able to process their emotions properly. And there's a lot of research about this. This is a lot about attachment theory, if anyone's interested to go read about this stuff. But the connections we have with our parents or whoever was raising us when we were very little allow us or not allow us to process our emotions properly. So there are obvious things like sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse that will cause me as a little child to not be able to process my emotions properly. But it doesn't have to be overt abuse. It can also be emotional neglect or just a disconnection emotionally between me and my parents. If I don't have an emotional connection with my parents, a healthy emotional connection with my parents, I may grow up not being able to process my own emotions. And so I do, and there'll be people in this room at the moment who, look at themselves and they're thinking like, well, I haven't been sexually abused, my dad didn't beat me up, it's almost like, what's my excuse for having an addiction? And I often come across people like that. But the truth is that a lot of people in this room unfortunately have been abused, but there are also a lot of people that haven't. But that's because it doesn't have to be overt abuse. There can also just be emotional disconnections, like, significant ones obviously, but emotional disconnections between me and whoever's raising me. And that also causes me not to be able to feel my emotions, which then puts me at risk for developing an addiction. And so that's the first way that sort of the seeds for addiction can be planted early on. There are other people that might be lucky enough to escape childhood with a fully functioning container or a good enough functioning container, but then some type of trauma happens later in life. And these days we call that post-traumatic stress disorder. But there are a lot of similarities between them, because basically what happens is that in traumas we're overwhelmed with overwhelming emotions, and they kind of break apart our ability to then process emotions. So we become withdrawn, we become numb, we become full of anger, which is a similar idea in many ways to this container idea. So in other words, and after that trauma, from that point on, I can't process my emotions anymore properly. It's a very similar thing. Unfortunately, as many of you will probably be able to attest to, both things often happen. And it's a sad part of being human that odds are, if I didn't have a fully functioning container to begin with, I will go on to have more traumas in my life for a whole lot of reasons which we can discuss at some stage. But we tend to repeat dysfunctional patterns as human. And so a lot of people in this room will have had both. First of all, I could never process emotions properly, and that's because of things that happened in my childhood. And then also I went on to have traumas. And so often you get both as well. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on? Makes 100% sense?
100%.
Okay, good. So can anyone think of emotions that they know that they have inside them that are overwhelming for them and that they can't, and that you can't feel properly, and just sit with it? And I'll get a bit of a list. You can just call them out and I'll get a bit of a list happening.
Love.
Disconnection.
Anxiety.
Anger.
So anxiety and fear, I'll put them together. Anger,
Sadness.
sadness,
Loneliness.
loneliness,
Guilt.
guilt,
Shame.
shame. Okay, so etc. Someone said love, which I assume for that person is a positive emotion. And it's important also thinking that for a lot of people, positive emotions also become overwhelming. It doesn't have to be like negative emotions that hurt. Emotions that feel good can also become overwhelming.
Worth,
Sorry,
worth, self-worth.
what's the feeling?
Another? I don't know.
Like I feel good, you're saying? Like a feeling like I feel good about myself. So that also becomes overwhelming. So yeah. Yeah, so worthy or something, yeah, something like that. Worthy, yeah.
Excitement.
Excitement, yeah. So it can be painful, but also, positive emotions can also become scary and overwhelming. Okay, so we'll come back to this soon. But I think it's useful to think of this emotional issue in two parts, even though they're very connected, as we'll see. Hang on, got to say something very important. So I talk for a lot, but there's about 10 minutes which is, I think, particularly important to listen to if you're struggling to listen for an hour, because it's even more. So these are 2 minutes that I think are particularly important to listen to if you're struggling to focus. So it's important, I think, to realise that as humans, we can tend to deal with emotions, particularly negative emotions, by pushing them away. So I feel anger, I feel hurt, I feel lonely, and I push it away because I don't want to feel it. Can people kind of connect to that you do that? I mean, we all do that, I do that. And it's normal and healthy if we do it sometimes, but I think it's really important to think about the idea that if I'm constantly pushing away my emotions, or I constantly push away one or two emotions, that is going to become really dysfunctional, and it just doesn't work as a human. It just doesn't work. And it's going to come back to bite me. And in fact, often, I think, when we push away emotions continually, it actually makes the emotion bigger and bigger and more painful and more scary. And I'll just give one example, or there are many examples. But so, for example, there are people that can't stand feelings of, like, let's say, loneliness and rejection and abandonment. Like, those feelings are just way too intense. They're way too intense, and I can't sit with them. So if you think about what happens, so let's say I walk around and I've got these deep feelings of loneliness and rejection, abandonment down there, which is really painful. So I want to get into a relationship, because who wants to feel lonely? And me, I don't want to feel lonely because it kills me. So I meet someone and I connect to them, and then I want to get closer to them. But if you think about what happens then, they start getting closer and closer, and all of a sudden fear comes up inside me. Anxiety. Why? Because if they reject me, if they don't like me, then I'm going to end up feeling lonely and abandoned again, and that's going to kill me. So I actually can't let them that close. I need to push them away or pull back a bit from the relationship, because I become so scared that if they leave me, which they will, because I'm a piece of crap, and so if they leave me, I will end up feeling those feelings that I don't want to feel, so I can't let them close to me, so I have to pull back. So I pull back or push them away, but then I just end up feeling more loneliness and abandoned because the relationship hasn't gone well, so then more feelings come up, but I push it down again. But then again I want to connect to someone, so I try to connect again, but then again I can't because the fear comes up that pushes me away, or pulls me away, pushes them away. So then I just feel lonely and abandoned again, and it just goes round and round. And meanwhile, inside me, these feelings are just getting bigger and bigger and scarier, and kind of just building on themselves and making me crazy. Do people kind of connect to that idea?
Yeah.
So in other words, you end up being driven by the fear of feeling the feelings. And the fear of feeling the feelings makes us avoid things, which makes us which takes control of our behaviour and makes the whole thing worse. It makes us crazy. That kind of makes sense. Take that out. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Not for me, man.
Okay, so is there,
Should do that.
okay, so let's say there's a particular feeling in me which I can't stand. Yeah, like it's too overwhelming for me, it's too scary for me. I will end up avoiding situations which may trigger that feeling.
Yeah.
Because I'm scared, yeah? So in other words, the fear of the feeling will control my behaviour and make me do things or not do things. So that the fear ends up controlling my behaviour. So in the case of loneliness, rejection and abandonment, I won't allow myself to get too close to someone. The basic idea is you can't keep pushing away emotions. It just doesn't work as a human. It just doesn't work. That's the basic message. Okay. So it's useful to think about this emotional issue in two separate parts, even though they're very connected, as we'll see. And one is this emotional issue, and the other one is self-esteem. So I'm going to talk about self-esteem now for 15 minutes. And that is because I, like other people who work with addictions, have noticed that self-esteem is extremely connected to addiction. This has been noted when AA first started, and it's been noted by a lot of people that work with addictions, including myself. I myself have not yet met someone with a good going addiction who has healthy self-esteem. I just have not met that person. I suspect that person doesn't exist. They might, but I haven't met that person. I have met people with addictions, and there will be people in this room like this. I have met people with addictions who assure me that they have good self-esteem. I have very good self-esteem. Trust me, I've got good self-esteem. And there'll be people in this room like that, and that's okay. I would ask you to entertain the following idea, which is that unhealthy self-esteem presents in two ways. One way is the classic way, which is, I don't like myself, I'm a piece of crap, I'm worthless, I'm hopeless, I'm useless, I'm disgusting, I don't fit in, no one will ever love me, I'm terrible, I'm crap, I hate myself, etc. That's the kind of classic understanding of low self-esteem, or unhealthy self-esteem. The other way that unhealthy self-esteem presents, which is counterintuitive until you think about it a bit more, the other way unhealthy self-esteem presents is that I'm actually pretty awesome. I am pretty awesome. I don't really have any problems. I kind of understand myself. I don't really have any contradictions in myself or overwhelming emotions in myself. My relationships are pretty good. My job's good. I'm pretty good. I got this, and fine, I might have this addiction thing. Sure, I got this addiction thing, but I just have to have a bit more willpower and I'll be able to kick it, don't worry. And so you come into a place like this, and it's like, yeah, thanks for all your lessons and all the talks and all that therapy stuff, that's great, but I got this, and that's what I think deep down. I might not want to share it with everyone because it might be a bit embarrassing for me to say that, but deep down that's what I think. I got this. Why? Because I got everything. I got my life, I got myself and I got it. And that person is the high ego, low self-esteem person. Because what is healthy self-esteem? Healthy self-esteem is the ability, I think, to look at myself and realise that I am human, which means that I am screwed up, which means that I have anger issues and I can go crazy sometimes, and I can be manipulative, and I'm often selfish, and I often don't care about anyone else. But I can look at myself and kind of accept myself for being human and having flaws. Whereas unhealthy self-esteem is, I look at my flaws and I hate myself for my flaws, or I deny my flaws. Why? Because I hate them so much. I deny them because I hate them. I hate my flaws so much that my own mind tricks me into thinking that I don't have any flaws because I hate them so much, which is low self-esteem. If that kind of makes sense. And that's the arrogant, low self-esteem person. We are arrogant because we have low self-esteem. Arrogance and low self-esteem are the same thing. It's a compensation for low self-esteem. If that kind of makes sense. My understanding, arrogance and low self-esteem are the same. They're the same thing. So that makes a bit of sense. Okay, so low self-esteem. So again, I haven't met a person with an addiction who has healthy self-esteem. If you're sitting there thinking, I have healthy self-esteem, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, come speak to me, I'll convince you have low self-esteem. You're welcome to come talk to me about it. Okay, so low self-esteem, like other emotional issues, if I ignore it and push it away, tends to get worse and worse. And low self-esteem has a cycle. This is a low self-esteem bagel. And there is shame and fear. And low self-esteem will get bigger and bigger if you just leave it. And I'll just explain a little bit how that works, how I think it works. I'm just going to move this table. So first of all, the emotions that are very connected with low self-esteem are shame and fear. Shame is not guilt. Shame is that feeling that I want to hide myself. You know that feeling? It's like, let's say like you're in a group and someone asks you to share something and you're like, ooh, like I can't share that. I have to kind of like hide that because I couldn't tell someone that. Like, you know, all humans, we all have shame. There are things that all of us would never tell another human being. We all have our secrets. They're things that I can't tell anyone. And if you think about how you would feel if you were forced to tell someone, it's shame. It's a feeling like, ew, like, you know, it's a hiding, like I need to hide myself. People kind of connect to that feeling themselves. And obviously, like, the more I don't like myself, the more shame I'm going to have, because the more I need to hide from the world. And so that's shame. Fear is just the flip side of that. And we call this, you know, you can call it social anxiety, or you can call it a fear of rejection and abandonment, or a fear that people won't like me, or fear that people will laugh at me, or judge me, or all those fears. You know, why do we have those fears as humans? We have those fears because our brain does something strange, and we assume that other people will see us how we see ourselves. So in other words, if I don't like myself, if I go to a group of people and I'm around those people, something inside me will assume that they will see me how I see me. And if I don't like myself, I'm going to assume that they don't like myself. And so put up your hand if you can connect with social anxiety, that feeling of social anxiety. Okay, so for those of you that can, that's a useful thing, a useful idea to think about. Because what we do is, we walk into a social situation and all of a sudden I'm scared. And I'm scared of like these judgments. And I think like, oh, maybe they'll think I'm stupid, boring and ugly. You know, and I'm so scared that people are going to think that about me. But what's actually happening is that deep down, I think I'm stupid, boring and ugly. I have low self-esteem. I don't like myself. And when I go to a group of people, something in my mind kind of projects it out onto everyone else. It's as if they're thinking that about me, and I'm scared of that judgment from them, but actually, I'm the one judging myself. I'm actually judging myself. My mind just kind of tricks me into thinking everyone else is going to judge me. That's really scary. But, you know, most of us can realize that they may or may not be thinking that. I don't know what they're thinking. So why am I so scared that they're thinking that? Well, it's because in that moment, I'm thinking that about myself. And, you know, so if you want to know what you think about yourself, think about what judgments you think other people think about you, and that's what you think about yourself. You just project it onto everyone else. That kind of makes any sense. And so fear is just the flip side of shame. Fear is, you know, shame is the sense like, I don't like myself, I need to cover myself up. So that when I'm around other people, I'm scared that they're going to see me, so I need to, you know, that's the fear. So they're, you know, they're kind of like two sides of the same coin, if that makes any sense. So fear and shame tend to get bigger and bigger and bigger if you don't address it. And I'll just give you an example of how that happens. So for those of you who are struggling to listen, particularly if you identify with having low self-esteem, I think this is a particularly important 2 minutes to listen to. So concentrate on this 2 minutes if you can. So how does low self-esteem get bigger and bigger? So I'll give you an example. So this is based on a true story. So, okay, so let's say there's a guy and he grows up, his sexuality is developing, and his sexuality is developing, and when he's like 10, 11, his dad's in the house, and his dad is making a lot of gay jokes. So his dad's making gay jokes, And all the while, this little kid's sitting there saying like, oh, maybe maybe that's me. And so all of a sudden, that kid gets shame. Yeah? Oh wow, there's something wrong with me. Yeah, there's something dysfunctional about me. And it's useful to actually, it's a very important point, I think, to realise that as a general rule, if things went wrong between you and your parents, you will blame yourself as a kid. It's much safer to blame yourself and direct all the anger towards yourself. Anger directed towards the self, it was one of the earliest descriptions of a cause for depression. And I think a lot of depression is that. And it starts early. It starts because you had something go wrong with your parents, and all of a sudden, oh, it's my fault, so I'm crap, and all the anger goes this way instead of that way. Right, that's just something to think about as an important side point. But okay, so that kid has shame. So okay, so then you have shame. So then you think about what happens, you go to school, and you're around all these people at school, and so then fear kicks in, yeah? So then you become socially anxious, because already you don't like yourself, so then you go and you're around other people, and you have all of a sudden fear that people won't like me. But then you see, once we have fear in social situations, we start acting strange, we do weird stuff, and you stop being yourself because you kind of have to cover yourself up because you've got shame. And we all do different things when we're socially anxious. This person started to be very clingy to his friends. Because that's one thing we do if we're socially anxious, we're scared people are going to leave us, you become clingy. Some of us totally withdraw, but some of us become clingy. So he became very clingy, which is annoying. It's annoying if kids are mean and kids are cruel and kids don't get it. All his friends knew was this kid is annoying, he's too clingy, yeah? So when he was about 14, all his friends kind of just all at once, all together, told him, we don't want to be friends with you, you're annoying, none of us want to be friends with you, yeah? So then think about what happens to that kid. He goes back to here, yeah? It's like, oh, even more shame. Oh, see, there really is something wrong with me, yeah? And by this time, in social situations, he has really quite a deep fear now that people are not going to like him because my dad didn't like me and now all my friends said there's something wrong with me. So for sure there's something wrong with me. So now I'm really scared in social situations. So then, whatever we do when we really got this deep fear, we connect to, weird social groups or, anyone that will accept us, we get sucked into that, or, someone gives us love, so like we go for that. And, but because we're already so dysfunctional, the relationships are not going to work because they're already set up to fail because I've got so much fear and I can't show myself and so much shame. So again, the relationship just don't work, so then I get even more shame and it goes round until you're 30 and you come and see me, and this is the important bit, if you connect with low self-esteem, I ask you, I say something like, wow, it looks like you really don't like yourself. And you're like, yeah, I hate myself. There's something really wrong with me. I say, oh, that's interesting. How do you know there's something wrong with you? Yeah? And you have all this evidence that there's something wrong with you. Yeah? Oh, because I went out with this person, they said I was a freak, and this didn't work, and then this happened, and I went to jail, and yeah? But think about this example. If this guy hadn't had the dysfunctional relationships later in life, he wouldn't, start again. If this guy's dad hadn't made homosexual jokes, he would not have had the shame put in him, which means that he would not have been clingy with his friends, which means his friends would not have broken up with him, which means he wouldn't have gone on to have other dysfunctional relationships. So in other words, there's two things, and as humans we get them mixed up. All these things that I do, all this evidence that I have that something is wrong with me, and my feeling that something is wrong with me. Yeah, over here I have feelings that I am screwed up and I'm worthless and I'm crap. And here is all the evidence that I use to prove to myself that those things are true. Yeah? I can almost guarantee you that if you look at yourself and your lives, you hated yourself before any of that stuff happened. Because once, as a human, once you have low self-esteem and once you don't like yourself, things start to go crazy and it doesn't work. As humans, we can't live very well if we have low self-esteem. And what we tell ourselves is, I have all this proof of why I hate myself, but the truth is, I can almost guarantee you, you did not like yourself before any of that stuff. Does that kind of make a bit of sense? And so it's almost like that stuff becomes a justification for my feelings that I'm worthless. But I felt worthless, probably, often because something happened to me when I was young that made me feel worthless, and that's it. And from that time, my life has kind of gone off. Because once I feel worthless as a human being, things don't go well for me. That kind of makes a bit of sense. My experience is that there are often people that think they have happy childhoods, but once they actually delve into the childhood, they realise that actually something wasn't right. That's my experience. So I can only tell you what my experience and what I believe, but it's a belief. I don't know that for sure, but my experience tells me that people that become addicted had some type of issue before that already made them predisposed to not be able to process emotions properly. And therefore they start, and they get some type of relief from the painful emotion with the drug or alcohol, and that's why they get addicted. That's my belief. There are other people, people like Gabor Mate, and there are people that also agree with the way I see the world, but there are people that disagree. So, full disclosure, depends who you ask. So it tells me that there's always something underlying. There's always some pre-existing emotional issue. It may not have been so severe, and just because you had that emotional issue doesn't mean you're becoming an addict. It could be something else will happen to you in your life. You might become chronically depressed or anxious or whatever. But my experience is that, I haven't met someone with an addiction. I met a lot of people with addiction that didn't have something happen in their childhood, which kind of like made them, whatever. Not like crazy, but just like something.
Have you met someone without an addiction who...
Okay, so back to low self-esteem. Low self-esteem has some very important impacts on early recovery. Very important. And I'm going to talk about a few of those at the moment because it's very important to catch these things early, otherwise it will cause you to relapse for sure. I've seen it before and I will see it again. Okay, the first one is what we spoke about before, which is the high ego, low self-esteem. This is a massive trap. I can't tell you how big this trap is. And I've seen it before and I'll see it a million times again. There are people in here, and again, this is not a judgment, it's just how it is. There are people in here that will be telling themselves right now, I got this. I seriously got this. I just need a little bit more willpower. I've just got to be a bit stronger and I will be able to stop this addiction. Why? I tell myself that because the truth is, if I look at myself, I don't really have any problems. Like, I'm pretty much perfect, and that's just me. And again, that's not a judgment, because if that's you, we don't do that on purpose. We all have that as we all deny our problems to a certain extent. I deny my problems to a certain extent, and everyone does here. It's just some of us deny it to an extreme, to the point where I don't really need anyone else's help to get over this addiction because I can do it myself. Thank you very much. And that is a massive, massive trigger for relapse, because that means that you don't get help and you don't ask for help and you really believe that you can do it all yourself. And the truth is, most people with addictions just can't. You just can't. But there might be something inside of you trying to convince yourself that you can, because you don't want, it's too painful for you to look at yourself and see your own problems. So you just deny all your problems, and you deny that you need anyone's help, because that means that you're vulnerable, and to ask for someone help means that I have problems. So you can't ask for help, and then you're alone, and then you relapse. And that's a massive trigger for relapse. So I would encourage you that if you are feeling that way or thinking that way, talk about it. Talk about it in group. Tell me about it. Challenge me. Come tell me that you're wrong. I do have healthy self-esteem, and I don't really have any problems. And we'll talk about it. Just be open with it and try and explore it a bit. So that's the first way that low self-esteem can really, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, can really trick you in early recovery. That's one way. The second way is self-sabotage. Self-sabotage, and some of you will be able to consciously connect to this, and for others of you it will be more unconscious. Self-sabotage is another one of those things which is really weird when you first think about it, but then it makes a lot of sense if you think about it more. What it means is that there is part of you guys that actually wants you to fail. It wants you to relapse, it wants you to screw up, it wants you to be miserable, it wants you to be sick, it wants you to basically die. In other words, there's actually a part of you that wants you to relapse. It wants you to relapse. It wants you to stuff it all up. Why? Because once we lose faith in ourselves so much, once I just have no faith in myself anymore, and I really don't believe I can do recovery, once I start doing recovery, I start to become very anxious. Why? Because I can't do this. I can't do this. And every day that I do it a bit more, I become more and more anxious and scared because I know that the relapse is coming. I can't do this. So that becomes very scary for me. It becomes very anxiety provoking. How do I get rid of that anxiety? Oh, it's okay. I still got that bottle in the in the basement, or I still got that guy's number that I can ring up, and oh, so yeah, okay. So it's I got that little packet in my in my bedside drawer. It's like, and then all of a sudden, the anxiety goes away. It's like, oh yeah, I can just relapse. There's not always that conscious, but in other words, once I really, really lose faith in myself, it's actually much easier to just screw it up. It's the same with addiction and relapses, and the same with life, with relationships, with work. Think about relationships. Once you become convinced that someone is going to break up with you or not like you, you will push them away or pull back from the relationship or do something to damage the relationship. Because it's too scary to sit with the prospect that they are going to break up with me, they are going to hate me, so I will sabotage it, and that makes me feel better. I'll give just another, based on a true story, and it makes the point. I'm sorry if it's a bit triggering for anyone, but it just makes the point very clearly. So I still see someone who. So she was physically abused by her father when she was young. So her father would hit her. So she was a little girl, this big scary person hitting her is obviously overwhelmingly scary for a little girl. So what she did was, and this is kind of unconscious as a little girl, but that's the thing, it's still unconscious in us as adults. She something switched inside her, and all of a sudden she kind of realized that if she walks around ready for him to hit her, it's actually less anxiety provoking. Because obviously, like, if you're expecting to get hit, it hurts less, yeah? Than if someone just hits you, yeah? So it's like she was walking around then for a year or two, just always waiting, I'm waiting to get hit. And that kind of deals with the anxiety a little bit. But you still feel full of fear, because it's like, I'm just waiting to get hit, I'm waiting to get hit, I'm waiting to get hit. So what she did is, a couple of years later, she realized that if she could provoke her father. She knew what his buttons were, and she could push his buttons and get him to hit her. And that's what she started doing. And you can look at that and think that's crazy, but it actually makes so much sense. Because think about it. You're waiting to get hit. There's anxiety, fear, and the hits come anyway, And then it's like, I can get control of the pain. I can trigger the pain, which allows me to get control of the pain. Yeah, so I will push my dad to hit me, and that is actually the least anxiety-provoking situation in a terrible situation. If I'm going to get hit, it's much safer for me, it feels much safer to trigger him to hit me. It's much safer because I have some type of control over the pain, so the anxiety decreases. In other words, if you are convinced that something bad is going to happen, something inside you will want to bring that towards you and cause it to happen. So if I'm convinced that I will relapse because I have lost faith in myself and I have no self-esteem, there is going to be a part of me that wants me to relapse. Just because it's safer, it gives me control over the inevitable relapse. And because it feels less scary, something inside me wants to do it. We tend as humans to do what makes us feel less scared, less anxious.
So is self-sabotage, for me,
It just drives me crazy, and I can't handle it, and I'll do something to sabotage it all, and then okay. The fuse gone, because, I was scared of succeeding, because I don't believe I can do it. So it's an inevitable failure, and that makes me too scared. Because I've lost any sense of self-esteem or trust in myself. We'll talk about it after. Just a couple of things about low self-esteem, which are important in early. So just to go back to that for a second, that's very important in early recovery because there will be people in here right now that have already planned. You've already planned your relapse, but you don't realise it's because you've got low self-esteem. You just think, it's okay. You don't realise it's because you lost faith in yourself, and actually you can have a bit of faith in yourself, and actually you can do it. And started to work, get a bit of faith in yourself, you wouldn't have to relapse. You know, it's like you don't have to relapse, like you can do it. Anyway, another very important thing to try and catch yourself out in early recovery. 2 very important causes of early relapse based in low self-esteem. Another 2 aspects to low self-esteem, which are important parts of early recovery, is that we develop false self or masks, and I lose myself. So, if you think about, so let's say I do have self-esteem issues, which means I can't fully be myself in front of other people. I can't show myself to other people. I'm scared to show myself to other people. I'm scared to be open and vulnerable. So I need to hide. So we all hide, all humans hide. Some of us, it's just again, the lower my self-esteem, the more I'm going to hide. So I develop like a false self or a mask. And we can develop lots and lots of these things. And they're important to see in early recovery in order to start pulling back and sort of getting to know yourself a bit better. We tend to use our strengths. So if I'm a really funny person, I will make jokes all the time, particularly when I'm socially anxious. And I'll make joke after joke after joke after joke. Because something inside me kind of gets that people like that, you know, and that makes me feel comfortable in social situations. If I'm beautiful, I will tend to accentuate how I look, or I will wear certain clothes because I know something inside me knows deep down that people kind of connect to that, and that makes me feel safer. Yeah. If I'm very rich, I might, you know, the first time I meet someone, I might drop into like, oh yeah, I just live around the corner in Turak, you know. Or you know, if I have like an amazing job, or if I'm very intelligent, I'll like drop these big words all the time, and I'll make sure everyone here kind of gets this sense that I'm really intelligent the first time I meet them. You know, like drop big words, or you know, whatever, all the craziness. And these things, if you think about what we're doing, and we all do this, there are ways of kind of connecting to people while we're actually hiding. We're actually hiding, but we're also, you know, it's like a fake connection almost. Because I don't really, you know, I want to connect with people, but I'm too scared, so I'll put up this false thing, like flash this thing, so, you know, you guys can connect to me while I'm actually hiding. Another one that we get into a lot here for a particular reason, which I'll talk about a little bit later, caregiving. So I can speak about this from personal experience. I used to think I was a really nice person. Like I really did. I thought it was like, I'm super nice. I'm always nice to people. I'm a really nice person. And then like, you know, at some stage of my life, it kind of clicks. It's like, oh crap, I'm only nice to people because I want them to like me because I'm insecure. It's like, oh crap. And that hurts. You know, that's a painful awareness about myself, but it's true. And, you know, so that's another way of, you know, it's another kind of mask that I can wear. But underneath, I'm just this insecure mess. This is unhealthy for a number of reasons, including that I'm getting my self-esteem from something external, even if that's my looks or my intelligence. It's still external. It's not really me. And it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because it's external and I don't have control over it. I don't actually have control over how much money I have or what job I have. I can lose it. I can lose my looks. I can lose my intelligence as I grow up. I can lose the job. I can lose my role as a mother or father or brother or sister or caregiver or whatever. I can lose it. And then I crumble and I have a breakdown because I actually have no self-esteem plus than us. And so I'll maybe speak a little bit about it and then see if you still have the question. You know, the other thing that we tend to do if we're like this is we don't like people and it makes us jealous and hateful and spiteful because let's say my self-esteem is based on my intelligence and my looks. As soon as someone more intelligent or better looking comes in the room, I feel threatened. I get really jealous and I hate them. Yeah, why? Because that's me. No, I'm the beautiful one, I'm the intelligent one, I'm the rich one. Yeah, and I can't stand it. It drives me crazy because I feel threatened. I actually feel threatened if you think about how you feel. You feel threatened because someone else is taking away your power, the thing that you use to make yourself feel safe in the world. So what do I need to start doing in recovery? I need to start peeling back the layers of what I think myself is. I might think that I am my intelligence, that I like to show people how intelligent I am, why, because that's me. But then you haven't, so take me, I'll just give my own example. I like to, I'm a really nice person and that's part of me. Yeah, that's my identity, I'm a nice person. Then I realise like, oh shit, I'm only nice to people because I really want them to like me. That means I'm not a nice person. If fine, I still might have, I can be nice, whatever, but I'm not inherently a nice person, I'm actually inherently an insecure person. So I've just pulled back a layer of myself. Because the flip side of being low self-esteem and having masks is that I lose myself. I don't know who I am anymore, exactly. But what happens is I lose myself. And I think a lot of people with addictions do lose themselves in the external identifications or masks. And that again is kind of low self-esteem. So I lose myself. In other words, I don't really know who I am anymore. And in fact, maybe I'm scared of who I am. Maybe I'm scared deep down that I'm not a nice person, or maybe I'm scared that there is nothing underneath. I don't even exist, there's just a massive hole or emptiness because I don't know who I am anymore. And that is a very anxiety-provoking experience, to look at myself and think, oh, like, who am I actually? Like, I thought these things define me, but maybe they don't define me. That's a really anxiety-provoking experience. But I think it's a very healthy experience. It's a growth experience, but it's very scary and quite painful. And these are the things you'll be challenged in group about. Like, people will challenge you about things that you assume are so natural in you. Why are you angry? Of course I'm angry. I'm an angry person. I've always been angry. Well, yeah, but maybe there's something else to that. Or you're really nice to someone, and someone challenges you and say, "Why are you always nice to them? You don't even know them. You don't really care about them. Why are you so nice to them?" And you say, "Of course I'm nice. I'm a nice person." And then it's like, "Oh, hang on. Well, okay, maybe there's something more to it." But that's very anxiety-provoking and challenging and scary. So we don't like to do that. So it's like the barriers that you'll get in the reality check. They're so useful because they can reveal something about you that you don't realise. And so I think that's just an important process to start doing in early recovery. It's very scary, but I think it's very healthy to have like an identity crisis almost. What comes to my mind on one foot, like in this instance, is first of all, am I just realising that I'm normal? Because normal humans are actually quite selfish. And I can be manipulative and I can be an angry person. And if I look at that stuff and hate myself for that stuff, I have to then ask myself, okay, well, why do I hate that about me? Maybe that's just normal. And maybe that's healthy, because maybe once I realise that about myself, I can actually start to grow into a really caring person. Oh, but I hate myself because of that. So if I really start hating myself because of those things, then I have to ask myself, well, why do I hate those parts about me? They're just, that's what makes me human. That I'm flawed and I'm crazy, and if I can't accept that about myself, then I think you should go speak to your local friendly psychiatrist or counsellor and kind of be like, or a friendly group, and say like, why do I hate myself for these things? Well, it's actually just human and normal. Low self-esteem, it's a big thing. And again, if you're convinced you don't have low self-esteem or unhealthy self-esteem, come talk to me, I'll convince you. I'll hypnotise you and trick you into. Okay. Anyway, getting back to this whole emotional thing and addiction thing, which is where we started. Okay. So again, you don't have to believe me, but this is what I believe, and this is how I understand things. That if you are in this room, that means you have stuff. It means you have stuff underneath that hasn't been processed properly. You walk through the world, and your stuff gets triggered. It gets triggered as emotions and as thoughts, and it drives you crazy. And it drives you crazy, and the emotions come up. But because I can't process the emotions properly, because that's kind of part of the core problem, I need to kind of block them somehow. I need to do something with them because I can't sit with them because they're overwhelming, because it's from all my past stuff and trauma, and again, not necessarily overt trauma. It can also be things like neglect and disconnection, but it's something very painful. So that stuff comes up, but I need to block it. I need to deal with it somehow. So then one of two things happens. The first thing is my own mind somehow helps me numb it. My mind somehow helps me get rid of that stuff. And that includes unhealthy behaviours. Some of the behaviours we do help us get rid of bad emotions, like guilt. I might not be able to sit with guilt, so I help everyone all the time, even if it kills me. Why? Because I can't sit with my guilt, so me helping people helps me deal with it. It helps me numb the guilt, it helps me get rid of it. So that includes kind of behaviours and personality stuff. And it also includes something called defence mechanisms. which defense mechanisms, which we won't talk about in detail now because it's a big topic, but they are things like, and you'll hear people talk about things like denial, minimization, projection. These are unconscious ways that our own mind helps us get rid of our stuff. I can't sit with stuff, so my mind does all these crazy tricks and turns and crazy stuff to help me deal with it. For example, I meet someone. How was your childhood? Great. Tell me what was great about it. Got everything I wanted. I got bikes and boats and cars. Okay. How's the relationship with your mum? It was okay. Tell me about it. Well, she worked very long hours and was never there for me. Okay, that's interesting. And what was the relationship like with dad? Well, he used to hit me sometimes and he told me I was a piece of crap. Okay, how does that feel? Oh, it's fine. You know, that's okay. You know, my childhood was fine. So what's that person doing at that moment? And again, this is an unconscious process. Yeah, this is why this is so tricky. But that person's mind is tricking them into thinking their childhood was okay because it hurts so much. The truth hurts too much. So my mind is going to block me from the truth to get away from that feeling that I don't want to feel, so it makes me numb from that feeling. That kind of makes, so that would be called minimization or denial. And there are all different ways, crazy ways that our minds help us deal with stuff. Another common one that you will see here a lot is intellectualization, which is you ask someone a question, you know that there's something down there. Yeah, you've just seen something in someone in the group and you say, oh, but you know, what happened then? And they shoot out an answer from up here and you're sitting there thinking like, that's BS. I don't buy that for a second. Yeah? But that person's not lying. Yeah? That person's mind has shot up an answer for them and just made it totally like up here. Why? Because that person doesn't want to feel their pain, but it's an unconscious process. Yeah, that person is not lying. Denial is not a lie. Denial is when I lie to myself, but I don't know that I'm lying. That's why it's so tricky. And that's why groups and feedback from other people is so helpful, because we don't see our problems as humans. It's a very tricky thing. I don't see my problems. It's true for me as well. I can see all your problems. You know, that's what I'm trained at. I'm trained to like seeing everyone else's problems. I don't see my problems because I'm also human. You know, like you can see other people's problems, but you can't see your own problems because our mind pushes them away so that we don't have to feel the pain. And so that's the first trick, that's the first way out of painful emotions. You can call that, I've seen people call this like internal addictions, which is an interesting, I think, way to look at these things, which is not about blame. It's not about thinking back to my childhood and like, oh, my parents did this to me, and then so I'm going to hate them and, you know, be angry at them forever. It's not about that. Because usually two things are correct. Our parents love us and they do the best they can. And two, they screw us up. That is usually what happens. So it's not about blame, but it is about understanding, and it is about being open to my own truth, my own emotional experiences. Because maybe I do have a lot of pain and a lot of anger that I don't want to feel, and it's very important for me to feel that. And once I feel that, I can actually then come to forgiveness. Because I feel the anger, I feel the pain, I understand what happened to me as a child, but now as an adult I can also look at my parents and realise that they also had issues, and they, you know, and that allows me to come to forgiveness. But I will never be able to forgive them if I don't even admit to myself that I'm angry at them. Because then, you know, forgiveness is just lip service. Forgiveness happens when I can feel the anger, and then work through it and understand that they also have problems. I don't know if that adds...
No, it makes sense.
Okay. Okay, so that's the first thing. That's the first thing I can do. Or what happens is I walk through life and I got all this stuff and it gets triggered and it comes up and I need to then use something outside of me to help me deal with what's inside of me, and that becomes an addiction if I do it all the time. And that's why as humans we can get addicted to basically anything, because there are lots of things in the world that help us with our feelings. Obviously, alcohol and drugs are very powerful in that sense, alcohol, drugs, but I can literally get addicted to anything. And other common ones are, you know, would be gambling, sex and porn, relationships, food, work, money, shopping, religions, cults, exercise, blah, 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 blah. You know, anything. You think about yourself. You will have other things that you do to help you deal with your emotions But when you start using the one or two things all the time, that's when you develop an addiction, and your mind, your brain gets stuck on this thing, and that's the thing that I use to make myself feel better, and that becomes my addiction. So, again, this isn't, I think, an important 2 minutes to think about, to focus on if you're having trouble, because it's quite long. Sorry about that. Try to focus on this 2 minutes if you're having trouble focusing. Because this explains what we do at Malvern. And this is very important to know, otherwise you'll just go crazy while you're here. If you don't get this place is just going to drive you crazy. If you don't get this idea. Think about what we do here. It's actually a bit crazy what we do here. You know, you could, all of you know, you could go to Thailand to a 5-star resort to work on your addiction. You could, and some of you have done that. And you can do that, and that's fine. But think about what we do here. So what do we do here? We get rid of your alcohol and drugs, we get rid of your gambling, you can't watch sex, you can't, if we think that you're developing a relationship in here that we think is a way of you, sort of an emotional thing, we will ask you to separate from that person. We can be wrong, and we've been wrong in the past, because it's a hard judgment call, but we make that judgment call and we will tell you, don't hang out with that person. It's okay, so relationship's gone. If we notice that, you know, often people's eating disorder stuff comes up when they're here, we'll try and help you modulate that. You know, you can't work, you can't have social media, you can't bring your family, you can't, you know. So you think about what we're doing. We are making you crazy. We're actually making you crazy. We're taking away all the things that you use to help you deal with your stuff. Why? Why do we do that? And this is the important bit, I think, to think about. We're not mean. We actually want to help. We want to help you guys. We do. So why do we do that? It's a very important thing to think about. Because if you think about the core issue is I have issues processing and modulating my emotions, which are connected to all this stuff that happened to me. Okay, so I can't do that. There are some things that as humans, you can only learn how to do by doing it. There is no other way to learn how to do it. So in other words, someone once gave this example, and I think it's a brilliant example, it's not mine, but I'll use it. Someone who's in the army. So think about how you train soldiers, yeah? You could train soldiers by taking them to Thailand, putting them up in a 5-star resort, getting the professor of war, I don't know if there's such a thing, but professor of war from Harvard, to come down and teach them 24/7 for 3 years. Yeah, so they know all the theory about war, they know everything about guns, they know everything about the tactics, they know everything, yeah, they've got it all. They understand it all. You can imagine what happens if you take that person and put them in a war situation. They'll be shot in 3 seconds, yeah? Like imagine that, they'll totally freak out, yeah? Why? Because if you want to be a soldier, you have to train how to be a soldier by being a soldier. You have to train how to be in a war by being in a war. You can't, there is no other way to train you. Sure, you have to have some knowledge, but to be a soldier, you have to be a soldier first. If that kind of makes sense. So in other words, for a human to learn how to process emotions, I don't know any other way for a human to learn how to process emotions except for processing emotions. I don't think there is any other way. And I think, you know, maybe some of you will connect to this idea because some of you may have read a lot of self-help books, a lot about addiction, all the neuroscience, all the, you know, the whole medical model, everything, and you understand addiction. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I've got it. I understand it. But I relapse in 3 seconds. Why? Because I still can't process my emotions properly. So what do here? We get you to come in here, and in a controlled way, we take away all your coping mechanisms, all the things that you're, not all of them, but a lot of the things that you use to deal with your stuff and push it away, we take it away so that your stuff comes up. And the whole point is when your stuff comes up, to start to try and talk about it, to feel it, to be open, to be honest, share your thoughts and feelings, etc., etc., etc. Because that's the whole point. The whole point is to start learning how to process my emotions, because if I don't, I will relapse in 3 seconds. That's the whole point. So in other words, you have to go a little bit crazy while you're here. You have to. Otherwise, you're going to get out there and relapse. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So don't worry if you're going crazy in here. You should be going crazy. You should worry, and this is a genuine comment. If you're going through here calm, collected, every single time you check in, you say good, calm, happy, you should be worried because where's your stuff? Where is it? You need to be triggered in here. If you don't get triggered in here, you'll go out there, you'll be triggered and you'll relapse in 3 seconds. Not for sure, but that's kind of the idea. So you should go crazy while you're here. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so, sorry, 10 more minutes. A little bit longer today for the camera. Sorry, 10 more minutes. If you can just give me 10 more minutes and we're nearly there. Okay, so just to summarize, the problem of addiction from a personal, psychological, experiential place is I have stuff, my stuff gets triggered, it comes up as emotions, and then one of two things happen. One, my mind blocks it, and some people use drugs and alcohol to feel something. Because as I've heard from a lot of people, it's better to feel something than nothing. Being numb after all becomes very painful. So either I might use drugs and alcohol to feel something, connected, love, whatever it is, joy, happiness, or, think about all the people at the raves and, it's such a good feeling. Or the emotion comes up and I need to kill it, I need to deal with it somehow, and then so I use drugs and alcohol. And that's, it's a pretty simple model. It's obviously quite complicated for each person, but it's quite a simple idea. I have stuff inside me, gets triggered as emotions, and I reach outside of myself to grab something to help me with what's inside myself that I can't deal with. That's addiction, from a psychological perspective. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to start reversing these things. This doesn't take long to talk about. It's very hard to implement, granted, but it doesn't take too long to talk about. They're pretty simple ideas at the core of it. Okay, so first I'll talk about self-esteem stuff, and then I'll talk about emotional stuff, even though you'll see they're very connected. Okay, so the first thing I think so this is another 2 minutes. That's important, I think, to try and understand. Okay, the first thing I think to understand about myself if I have issues like self-esteem is that the problem is not up here, the problem is down here. There are two very different parts of ourselves as humans. There is the cognitive me, they're both up here, but whatever. There is the cognitive me, the logical me that can kind of see the truth, and then there is this crazy bit that's also there, but this crazy bit that doesn't really care about the truth. It just doesn't care. It's crazy, it's emotional, it's immature, it's crazy. The problem is that this part of us controls our behaviour, not this. This is not strong enough to beat this. If this was strong enough to beat this, I would be out of a job and you guys wouldn't be here. It's pretty simple. In other words, this part of me, so take low self-esteem, for example, and how it plays out. So in other words, for those of you who connect to social anxiety, I can tell myself that, you know what, I shouldn't really care what people think about me. And, even if they do think bad things about me, who cares? Because I don't even know them. And you know what, even if I don't know them, stuff them, because, I'm okay, I'm okay, and I'm not such a bad person, I can kind of see that sometimes. Sometimes that thought might escape me, but there are times where I can really see that's my truth. But, sure enough, I go back into a social situation, and this part of me just goes crazy again. It just goes crazy and makes me crazy and makes me do all these weird things and all this crazy stuff I do, or I withdraw from the relationship, or again, I know this person loves me, when they get angry at me, I know that they love me and I know that they love me, but sure enough, when they get angry at me, it's like, ooh, I feel pain and hurt and lonely and anger. It's like, this crazy thing comes out, even though I know up here they love me and I should be able to trust them. This part of me just goes crazy. Can people connect to that? There are two different parts of them. That's quite important, I think. Does anyone not connect to that? They just have too low self-esteem to say that they don't connect to it. Irrational thinking is this controlling this. So in other words, irrational thinking is thinking based in it's like a rationalization. It's like when this controls this and makes me irrational. So what I'm talking about is actually the emotions underneath and the thinking. Because there's also irrational thinking, but this also has the potential, the ability to see the truth. Sometimes this is irrational, but sometimes this sees the truth. This is just crazy, as part of it. It's just crazy, it doesn't see the truth. So, What I need to start doing is working on this part of me. This part of me can see the truth, often, not always. What I want to do is start working on this part of me. This part of me, how do I work on this part of me? This part of me basically doesn't care about logic. I can tell myself for a million years that I'm a nice person, I'm a nice person, I'm a nice person. This part of me doesn't really care. It doesn't care. So how do I work on this part of me? I'm going to talk about how to do this in the context of group therapy and groups, because we're very big on group therapy, as you may have noticed. We encourage people to go to AA and NA groups, as you may have noticed. So I'm going to talk about how to do this in terms of groups and people, because that's a really good way of staying off drugs and alcohol. So what you need to do is work on this part of me. And this part of me doesn't talk the language of logic. This part of me talks the language of emotions and experiences. In other words, if I could come into Malvern Private Hospital and I can start, kind of drop all my masks and have the courage to face my shame and my fear and actually start to open up to people and have real, I actually show them who I am. And then I have experiences of people connecting back to me, having the same shared experiences, supporting me, maybe even loving me. Then I would start to feel better about myself. Can people kind of connect to that?
Yeah.
That it would be, you actually experience it. It's not just a thought. You actually experience healthy self-esteem. Like, oh wow, I'm worth something. Someone loves me, someone cares about me. I've done groups. I can tell you from first-hand experience, it's very powerful for self-esteem. It's very powerful. So how do I do that? It's a pretty simple thing, but it's very hard to do. It all starts with trust. I'll just do the little flow chart and I'll talk about it. And then open, vulnerable. Then I connect. And then I feel good about myself. Okay. It all starts with a little bit of trust, which is the whole anonymous thing. Trust is so important. It's like so powerful you can't even feel the trust. Everything is based on trust. If you that's why we do the confidentiality pledge at the end. If you talk about what happens inside a group, outside of a group, and you're kind of gossiping and laughing, I can guarantee you two things. The person, anyone that hears you or you're talking to, will lose trust in the program. They will lose trust because I'm not going to say anything, because people laugh. I can also guarantee you that you have no faith in the program, because you're breaking the boundaries yourself, which shows you that you don't trust the program. You don't trust people. That's also what it shows you. Anyway, it starts with a little bit of trust. You've got to have a bit of trust. And with that trust, what you need to try and do is become a bit open and vulnerable. And to become open and vulnerable, you need to overcome two things, which are based on the same thing, which is your shame and your fear, which come in and block you from being open and vulnerable. You have to realize that you have shame and fear, that you actually are scared to show yourself in group, because no human necessarily really wants to do that. There are parts of us that we need to hide. So you need to kind of realize you've got shame and fear, which blocks you. You need to try to overcome that to become open and vulnerable in front of other human beings and show them who you are. Because then something amazing happens. You'll notice, if you're in a group, or once you've done enough groups, that there are two experiences you will have with other human beings in group. The first one is when the person is being closed, or defensive, or intellectualizing, or defending themselves somehow from their experience, from their emotional experience. What you'll notice is that you will start to be something like distracted, bored, agitated, anxious, angry, annoyed, something. You'll notice that in yourself. It will just come up because you're not connecting with them. It's like, well, what are we doing here? It's frustrating. You'll also notice that when you're in a group with someone who's being very open and vulnerable, you'll notice that you start to connect to them. You kind of start to lean in. It's like, oh yeah, I connect to that. It's like something's happening here. I can kind of feel it. It's like empathy. You're connecting to another human being through their vulnerability. They're allowing you to connect to them through their vulnerability and through them being open. So the same thing is for you. If you're being closed, and it might be unconsciously closed, so it's not a judgment, but if you're being closed, you will not allow another human to connect to you. as a human, we only connect to other human beings when we are open and vulnerable. So for me to allow another human being to connect to me, I have to be open and vulnerable. I have to be. And when I get that connection, it can then make me feel really good about myself. And that's one way, a very powerful way of starting to work on self-esteem issues in groups. In other words, the groups, the 1030 process groups, should be very challenging. They should be anxiety-provoking. If they're not challenging and not anxiety-provoking, then you're losing the opportunity. You're losing the opportunity to work through these self-esteem issues because you're not taking advantage of the group. It should be hard, it should be anxiety-provoking, it should be very scary. If that kind of makes any sense. So do people connect to that kind of little flow of...
Yep.
Okay. It's also just, it's important to realise that if someone else in the group is not being vulnerable and open, it's often not their fault. They often don't realise it because they've got some unconscious defence that's not allowing them to be open and vulnerable. That's a very important thing to think about when you're in a group with people. They're not doing it on purpose to annoy you, Okay, so one more thing to talk about and then I will stop. So once I get the courage and the trust to overcome my shame and my fear and actually open up to someone for maybe the first time ever, or for the first time in years, to kind of show myself to people, once I get the ability to do that, and once, so what do I actually open up about? So whatever you open up about, just try and make sure that there is some type of emotion attached to it. You actually start to feel something. That's the important thing. And I guarantee you, again, going back to what I was saying before, you will all be triggered while you're here. We drive people a bit crazy here. Yeah, that's the point. Again, what I was saying before. You will all be triggered. There'll be people that annoy you. There'll be people that leave. There'll be nurses that annoy you. There'll be doctors that annoy you or ignore you and make you feel lonely and rejected and abandoned, or you'll feel like everyone's, against you, or you'll feel, your roommate will leave and you feel so lonely, or this person will say something in group and you get angry. All this stuff comes up. I guarantee you, you will be triggered because your main way of dealing with your emotions is gone. You will be triggered. The point is to bring that emotion up and actually talk about it. That's the whole point. And it might sound weird and I don't know, whatever, but like someone says something in group that makes you angry, the point is to share your thoughts and feelings and be spontaneous and say, wow, you just made me so angry then. Like, okay, maybe it's not you, I don't know what's going on, but I just feel so angry. That's the point. Your roommate leaves that you've connected to and you feel connected to them, but there's no one else here that you connect to and you feel so lonely. The point is, in the group, to identify, hi, my name's Ellie, I'm an alcoholic, and I feel lonely. That's why we identify with emotions, not thoughts. You don't identify what I'm thinking at the moment. I'm thinking I'm lonely. No, identify what you're feeling. I'm feeling lonely. And you bring it up and you talk about it and you start to feel it, because that's what you haven't been able to do for however many years, is actually start to feel and process my emotions. So I start bringing it up and I start feeling it, which is why, another couple of very important points, which is why we don't encourage you to help other people feel better in the group. What people need is to feel bad. People don't need to feel happy. You can feel happy watching a movie when you're out of Malvern Hospital. You don't have to feeling happy is great. It's great, it's nice, whatever. But in that moment, in the group, the person needs to feel their pain. They need to feel their sorrow, their loneliness, their anger, whatever it is. And if you think about it, it could be that someone, was abandoned by their mum when they were 5, and so they feel extremely abandoned and lonely, and that feeling has been like pushed down there since they were 5. That's where the gold is. That's why we don't want people to hand other people tissues, because you start crying and then someone gives you a tissue, like, oh, okay, thanks, and you like blow your nose and say, okay, and the feeling's gone. So again, it's just so the point is to try and bring up all your stuff with, bring up your emotions, and then try and start to feel it, because you're so scared of your emotions, but you can sit with them. And that's how you start kind of rebuilding this container, which will then allow me to rely less and less on external things to deal with what's inside of me, because I can start to deal with it myself.